Hey guys, welcome back to Iyanla Empowers. In today's video, we will be learning about coral reefs. Yes, I said it. Coral reefs. Now, we touched on coral reefs a bit when we were doing water pollution and land pollution, but we're going to touch on it in depth now. Before we get into the video, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. We are on the road to 1K subscribers. Now, let's get into it. I always start off with a definition. So, what are coral reefs? Well, coral reefs, they're living organisms and they are made up of colonies of hundreds or thousands of tiny individual corals called polyps, right? These marine invertebrate animals have hard exoskeletons made of calcium carbonate and are sessile, which means that it is permanently fixed in one place. They cannot move. Now, these polyps grow slowly, forming different shapes and sizes depending on their species. So that's all that makes up coral reefs, right? So they're the tiny individual corals. So thousands of them accumulate, create colonies, and they form, and they are sessile. So they are permanently fixed in one place. Okay, so if we look at the picture, to our left, we see just a pretty picture of the corals. We see that they have different colors. So we're seeing kind of grayish white. We're also seeing pink, blue, green. We're seeing all those colors, right? Now, what are the conditions that are necessary for coral reef growth, right? For humans, we need certain things. We need food, we need shelter, we need clothing, stuff like that. We have basic needs. Now, what are the basic needs basically for coral reef growth? Well, the first important thing is sunlight. So sunlight is very important. Corals need to grow in shallow water where sunlight can reach them. So in deep water they won't receive much sunlight, but in shallow water they're able to receive sunlight, right? Now, coral depends on algae that grow inside of them for oxygen and other things. And since these algae need sunlight to survive, corals also need sunlight to survive. Alright? So the corals depend on algae. So that's the first thing. Corals depend on algae, right? And these algae grow inside of them to get oxygen and other necessary things that this algae needs, right? Now, since the algae need sunlight, automatically the corals will need sunlight as well, because corals depend on algae, right? Now, corals rarely develop in water deeper than 165 feet, and we know the reason why. Now, not only is sunlight important, clear water is also important. Corals need clear water that lets sunlight through. So we can have the sunlight, but if our water is dirty, this sunlight cannot pass through, right? So we see how everything is blending in. Now, they don't thrive well when the water is opaque. Sediment and plankton can cloud water, which decreases the amount of sunlight that will reach the algae, right? Remember that the corals depend on algae. Algae needs sunlight. So if the water is dirty or clouded by sediment or plankton, then these algae would not get the sunlight, right? And if the algae cannot get the sunlight, then that means in the long term something will happen to the coral, and it won't be a good thing, don't it? Now, corals also need warm water temperatures. Now, reef building corals require warm water conditions to survive. So you can have corals, but to build a reef, you need warm water conditions. Now, different corals live in different regions and can withstand various temperatures or temperature fluctuations. So they're adapting to their environment basically. However, generally, corals live in water of temperatures 68 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, or commonly we always read their temperatures in Celsius, 20 to 32 degrees Celsius. So corals need 20 to 32 degrees Celsius on average for water, or for the water that they're in, right? So the first thing that we said was sunlight, and the sunlight is mainly because the algae needs the sunlight. Then we had clean or clear water. Let's say clear water, because clear and clean are different, and we're going to touch on clean soon. But clear water, so the sunlight can pass through, so the algae can get the sunlight. We also need warm water temperatures, right? So that the corals can build up. And these temperatures are usually 20 to 32 degrees Celsius. Next, corals need clean water. This is because corals are sensitive to pollution and sediments. And this is what we basically touched on when we were doing water pollution. Sediment can create cloudy water and be deposited on corals, blocking out the sun and harming the pulps. Wastewater discharged into the ocean near the reef can contain too many nutrients that cause seaweeds to overgrow the reef. So we know the clear water is so we want the sun to pass through, but clean water is also necessary because dirty water with sediments can affect the corals by harming the pulps, right? Now, wastewater can also contain too many nutrients, which causes the seaweeds to overgrow the reef. And if the seaweeds overgrow the reef, that means it's suffocating the corals. So sediments are not good because one, they block sunlight from entering. Two, they also affect or harm the pulps of the coral. And also wastewater can contain too many nutrients that causes seaweeds to overgrow. Now, salt water is also a condition that is necessary for coral reef growth. Now, corals need salt water to survive and require a certain balance in the ratio of salt to water. So you don't want too salty of a water, but you don't want too fresh of a water, right? So there must be some balance. Now, this is why corals do not live in areas where rivers drain fresh water into the ocean. These are known as estuaries or estuaries, however you want to pronounce it. All right, so they don't need a lot of fresh water. They require some salt in the water. All right, so you won't find them where a river will dump the fresh water into the ocean. That's not where you will find them. You'll find corals mainly on like beaches. If you walk like down a little bit more in the water, you see corals and stuff like that, and not necessarily where a river enters the ocean. All right. Now we're talking about corals and the conditions necessary for their growth. And if we just do a quick recaps, we need sunlight, clear water, clean water, warm water, and salt water. Alright. Now there are 3 types of corals. Alright, you have fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and atoll reefs. So many didn't know that there are different types of reefs. There are. Now the first one that we will speak on is fringing reefs. Now what are these? These reefs grow near the coastline around islands and continents. So you'll find them near the coastline. They are separated from the shore by narrow, shallow lagoons. Fringing reefs are the most common type of reefs that we see, which is true. Usually when persons refer to coral reefs or refer to reefs, they're usually referring to fringing reefs because they're so common. So they are just separated from the coast by just a narrow and a shallow lagoon, right? Now, many Caribbean islands have fringing reefs, and it's important to know which islands. So we have Barbados, Antigua, Tobago, St. Lucia, and Jamaica. We also have fringing reefs. Now, if you look at this picture here, it just gives you an idea of the reefs. So I'm just going to try to zoom in, although you guys won't see me be able to do so. But we see that, let's look at the coastline of the island. So this is an island. Let's look at the coastline of the island. All right. Now from the coastline, just a little bit up, we see that there's kind of a little border there. Right there where we see some buildup are the corals, right? It's the coral reefs. So we realize that it is actually just separated from the coastline by this narrow and shallow lagoon, and it looks very shallow because we can actually see where the bottom of it is. compared to outside of that, when the rest of the water just turns very dark. So you know that's deep water. All right, you can't see the end or you can't see the bottom. However, we see light blue water here, so we can actually see the bottom of what's going on right here. And just before we reach that deep water, we have our corals, and it's the fringing reef. And we can see that one, the water is shallow, so we're getting maximum sunlight. It's clean, right? So there's nothing blocking the sunlight. All right, and it's the ocean, it's the sea, whatever it is, it's salt water. So they have the salt water. Temperatures are going to make it be warm, and it's clean. We don't see any pollution here, so they're having clean water. So they have all the conditions necessary for them to flourish. Then the next reef that we will look on is the barrier reef. Now, barrier reefs are also parallel to the coastline, similar to fringing reefs, but they are separated by a deeper, wider lagoon. So the difference between a barrier reef and a fringing reef is a fringing reef is separated by a shallow, narrow lagoon, while a barrier reef is separated by a deeper, wider lagoon. Now, at their shallowest point, they can reach the water's surface, forming a barrier to navigation. So instead of them being underwater, at the shallowest point, they can actually reach the water's surface and they form a barrier, hence the name barrier reefs. So we get it? So fringing reef separated by shallow, narrow lagoons, barrier reef separated by deeper, wider lagoons. At the shallowest point of the barrier reef, however, they can reach the water surface and they actually form a barrier. Okay, now the Great Barrier Reef in Australia is the largest and most famous barrier reef in the world. Now, the world's second largest barrier reef, or the largest in the northern hemisphere. So it's the second largest, but in the northern hemisphere, it's the largest. It is found off the coast of Belize, so in the Caribbean. It is known as the Belize Barrier Reef, and it is just 300 kilometers long. Okay, parts of this reef are located about 40 kilometers from the shore, and the pictures below show a section of the reef. So let's look at this reef. All right, so we can see that deep. Are we seeing that deep blue water? Are we seeing that deep blue water? So that is that deeper, wider lagoon compared to the fringing reef picture, where it was shallow water, then the reef, then the deep water. But here it's the deep water, then the reef, then the shallow water, in a sense, right? Now, this is the shallowest part of the reef, so you can see it's rising to the surface to create a barrier. So that white thing that you're seeing there, that's just like the corals rising to the surface to create this barrier. And then this is just 40 kilometers from the shore or from the coast of Belize, and then you can see that the reef continues down, right? It's not quite at the surface, but it continues down, and it says it continues for about 300 kilometers. All right, so this is just showing just a small section of the reef, and remember, it's one of the largest. It's the largest in the northern hemisphere, and it's the second largest in the world. So you can imagine how long it is. All right, so we get two reefs out of the way, and now we have the atoll reefs. Right now, atolls are rings of corals that create protected lagoons and are usually located in the middle of the sea. So the thing with atoll reefs are that they create lagoons. I know lagoons are just simply an enclosed space of water. They're enclosed, or they're surrounded by land, or in this case, coral. So this is just water that is enclosed, right? So atolls usually form when islands surrounded by fringing reefs sink into the sea, or the sea level rises around them. So when the islands that are surrounded by fringing reefs sink into the sea, or when the sea level rises around them, you can atolls are formed. Now the fringing reefs continue to grow and eventually form circles with lagoons inside. So it's not just automatically if the sea level rises or if the island sinks, atoll is formed. No, it just means the fringing reef will just continue to grow around it until it just forms an atoll. So atoll, you can say, is just when a fringing reef forms into a circle, it creates an atoll reef, right? So instead of saying circular fringing reef, they just call it a different name, call it a different type of reef, and they said it was an atoll reef. All right, so we're getting the idea. So let's go for them. So we have fringing reefs, barrier reefs, and we have atoll reefs. Fringing reefs are formed, right? They are formed just off the coast by narrow, shallow lagoons. All right, so they're separated from the coast by narrow, shallow lagoons. Simplest way to say it. So fringing reefs are separated from the coast by narrow, shallow lagoons. Barrier reefs are separated from the coast by deep, wide lagoons. Atoll reefs are fringing reefs that form a complete circle. Or you could just say atoll reefs are rings of coral that create a protected lagoon, usually found in the middle of the sea. Now, this type of reef is found mostly in the Pacific Ocean, and there are 4 known atolls in the Caribbean Sea, and 3 of them are found off the coast of Belize. So Belize is a bit popular where reefs are concerned. So there are only 4 known in the Caribbean Sea, and 3 of them are found off the coast of Belize. All right. Now, what are the significance of corals? So we have the coral polyps, and they're growing, and they need all of this, and this is where they're found. But what are their significance? How do they benefit us as human beings? How do they benefit the environment? How do they benefit animals? Now, the first thing is coastal protection. All right, coastal protection. Corals form barriers to protect the shoreline from waves and storms. All right, did you know that? I'm pretty sure that didn't. The coral reef structure buffers shorelines against waves, storms, and floods by dissipating. That's the right pronunciation. Why was I double thinking that pronunciation? Dissipating as much as 97% of incident wave energy. So what the corals do, they act as a buffer. So they protect the shoreline, the coastline, the coast from waves and storms and floods, as they take on as much as 90% of the incident wave energy. They take on 90% of the energy. It leaves the coast with just 3%. So it's protecting the coast, right? Now, what it does is it helps to prevent the loss of life, the loss of property. It prevents property damage and erosion. It also allows wetland ecosystems such as mangroves and swamps to survive and grow. Mangroves provide valuable fisheries, ecotourism attractions, and ecological benefits to man. Mangroves can be a whole topic by itself. That's how vast mangroves are. Alright? But still focusing on coastal protection, let's just look at this picture here that I have at the bottom. It shows a healthy coral reef, right? I know a healthy coral reef means that the water is clean, the water is clear, the water is warm, the water is shallow, and the water is salty. And it also shows a degraded coral reef, maybe a reef that's not getting the attention that it needs, not getting the conditions that it requires to grow. No, it says a healthy reef creates crests near the surface and serves as a major natural break water, which reduces most wave energy. Now let's look at it. We see all of that water coming in. We're looking at the healthy reef now. So all of that water coming in, and we see that just after it passes the coral reef, we realize the waves are no more. They are no longer. The ship is still floating. The ship is still there, floating on the water. Our boat is still floating. Our trees are still there because the waves are not affecting this. They break. So what happens is that water that is coming for the shore, it meets on these corals. The corals acts as a buffer, takes on all of that wave energy and breaks it so that this wave energy does not continue to the shore. So are we seeing how it is broken? Right? That wave energy is broken so it does not affect the shore. Now let's look at the degraded reef. We realize that the degraded reef, that majority of this of the coast has been degraded, not just the reef, but the coast itself has been degraded. And the thing is, it has been degraded due to the waves. So maybe before, right, the corals were degraded, but it looked just like the shoreline, looked just like the first picture. But after a while, it's going to start to look like how this picture is looking now because the waves are affecting it. So what happened is there isn't any coral reefs anymore. So there's nothing to act as a buffer. There's nothing to break the waves. There's nothing to break the storms to prevent flooding. So what happens is all of this wave energy continues onto the shore. So it starts to degrade the shoreline. It affects the ship. It affects the boat. So the boat is covered in water. The ship is covered in water. The trees are no more. So let's not even talk about the trees, right? And it's causing flooding. And I'm assuming that these look like small houses and infrastructure. And some water is even going as close as to this hotel right here. So you're seeing that these things are why coral reefs are important. They may be preventing a lot of flooding and we don't even know it. Right? So that's one. Secondly, coral reefs are very important in tourism. Now, coral reefs are the poster child of nature-based tourism. So you want to interact with nature, you're a nature lover, come and swim with the corals. Now, many visitors come specifically to visit the reefs themselves, to swim over shimmering gardens of corals amongst hordes of fish. It reproduces sand, which provides us with the beautiful shorelines many tourists find very attractive. Now, the Bahamas and Jamaica are well known for their beautiful coral. There are also attractions in most Caribbean islands. I remember the Caribbean islands that had reefs, especially the French reefs. We had Barbados, we have Antigua, we had Tobago, we had St. Lucia, we have Jamaica, we have Bahamas. So many persons want to come, they want to swim with the reefs, they want to see the fish, they want to be a part of nature, they love the water, so they come for this tourism. And it's also important to note that these coral reefs also provide employment for scuba divers, for tour guides, for boat riders, stuff like that. So it's also contributing to our GDP, right? It's contributing to our foreign exchange. It's contributing to our well-being, our peace of mind, recreation. Some of us just want to go and spend some time with nature, understand ourselves, understand our environment. So they want to swim with the reefs to provide us with peace of mind. So there's a social benefit and there's also an economic benefit. All right. Now, fishing is also very important. Now, coral reefs are a habitat for fish and shellfish, which are important sources of protein for humans. They also provide shelter and food for many species of marine life and birds, right? They also provide a source of income and a way of life for fishermen. Coral reefs are an important resource for large-bodied fish in the Caribbean. They use the reef for shelter during the day and as a hunting ground by night. Yeah. Recent studies have shown that coral reefs rely on fish too. So not only do fish rely on coral reefs, it's also vice versa. Fish excrete ammonium, an essential nutrient for coral growth, through their gills. Alright, so let's talk about fishing now. So if you look at all the pictures, you realize that we don't have any picture here for fishing, because I think we covered fishing and it being we covered coral reef and it being a habitat for fish. If we look at our tourism picture, we see fish. If we look at our coastal protection picture, we see some fish, right? Yeah. If you look at our first picture, when we were defining what coral reefs are, we see a lot of fish, and they're usually small fish. So coral reefs are a habitat for fish, shellfish, because, well, these fish and shellfish, we eat them. They're an important source of protein for us. So they breed at coral reefs, some fish that is. What they do is they provide shelter and food for these fish. Alright, so some fish feed on the phytoplankton and some other things that the coral has. So it's serving as food, and it also provides a shelter for the fish, so they can go there at night. Hence why, right, for the big fish, they're a hunting ground at night, because this is where the small fish are at night for their shelter, right? Also for birds as well. Remember, where corals grow, it's very shallow, so that means birds can always fly down, get some food. And they can, some birds like the water as well, so they're also underwater. Alright? Now, it's also important to note, they are a very important source of income for fishermen. And it also is a way of life for fishermen. So fishermen, they go out early in the morning, get as much fish as possible. They're finding majority of the fish at coral reefs. They come back, they sell the fish, source of income. Some fishermen just want to go out, also want to interact with nature, just want some time for themselves. They just think that it's something that they grew up doing, so it's their way of life. So it's an important part of the culture for fishermen, because this is something that they saw their fathers do, their uncles do, so they want to do it as well. Now, coral reefs, as I said before, very important for large-bodied fish. They can get their food there. It's also good for shelter for them during the day, and they can hunt there for food during the night. Alright. Now we have some negative repercussions of our actions as humans, and also natural actions as well, natural disasters, stuff like that affects the growth of our coral reefs, affects the overall purpose of the reefs. And we're going to touch on that in my next video next week. So we're going to talk about, so it's good for tourism. Coral reefs attract tourists, but then what happens when the tourists get here? Have you ever thought about that? When the tourists are here, when they're swimming with the corals, what happens to the corals then? We'll find out in the next video. When our fishermen fish for the fish, remember, fishermen are trying to get as much fish as possible so they can get some money. What happens when the fishermen go out there and they fish? What about the technique that they're using? What about if they're listening to the rules, the guidelines? What about it? What about what type of fish they're fishing for? Do they contribute to the corals? Are they necessary? Stuff like that. We talk about coastal protection. We know that there are a lot of infrastructure, there are a lot of businesses, there are a lot of things going on the coast. What about when those businesses or those industries or those persons start to pollute the water? Remember, the water shallow. Remember, the water is close to the coast where the coral reefs grows. What happens when pollution starts to take effect? Remember, we talk about water pollution. What happens to our corals then? We saw the picture of the healthy coral reef and the degraded coral reef, but let's talk about what made the coral reefs degraded. What made the coral reefs degraded? There's a lot to talk about with coral reefs. It's a very interesting topic. I will definitely touch on the consequences and the causes for coral reefs degradation, and also what can we do. All right, what can we do as people to protect our reefs? What can we do? All right, I don't want to turn this into our video, so I'm breaking here, and I will see you next week for threats to coral reefs. If you have anything to comment below, or text me on Iyanla Empowers on IG. I'm always listening out. I'm always looking out for the DMs. Much love, guys. On the road to 1K. Bye.